One of the most interesting experiments that I've seen is in Scotland, where in the state is, and it's interesting that the state...
Where the state grew a little moustache just under its nose and started going, I'll get it done, I can't dig out! That's what the state in Scotland started to do. The experiment in Scotland is the most interesting that I've seen, where the Scottish female Hitler has been in charge.
Can be a mover of these examples, is asking people with very difficult work, like you're a grave digger or a rubbish collector. So in the state, you can only apply for those jobs when you're young, and then when...
So the state says you can only apply for those jobs when you're young. When you're older, you have to do different jobs.
When you're a bit older, you do kind of slightly easier work, and then at the end you become kind of a community worker, a janitor. That's kind of so you can.
And you become a community by the end. So you in the middle you do slightly easier work, and then by the end, when you're in your middle age, you become a janitor or community worker. Yeah. Oh, but you will be sweeping the floor and shutting the fuck up. Oh wait, 1 moment. We've got machines to do that now. Get onto the pile. It's time to get onto the pile. You're going to go the old way. It's the only way.
Also sort of spread the load in that way, which I think is really
spread the load.
It'd be amazing if work and family didn't peak at the same time in our lives.
Right, peaking and spreading loads. I mean, this is just getting sexy at the annual meeting now. Look at that. Crushing their hands together like Cruella de Vil. What do we value? Virtue. There's a lot of virtue attached to what she's saying.
Caring for your family is, and
there we go. Virtue. Yeah, and at the same time, you're destroying families abroad.
You spend on emotional caregiving is just as, really, if anything, it's more a measure of moral worth, but at the very least, it's equal. So if we're going to think about
moral worth, I'd give her emotional care. I'd put her in her emotional care home. That's where I'd put her in.
Welcome to The Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism. Whether you're a news junkie, a curious learner, or just looking for a fresh perspective away from the corporate media, this is the show for you. So join us now as we dive into the world of independent journalism on The Independent Review.
Welcome to the Independent Review. Today's clips include Ryan, Cristian, Ricky Verandas, Scott Armstrong, James Corbett, and Craig Pasta. Let's start with Ricky Verandas in his interview with Manila Chan.
Having recently been hosting a radio show, it's talk radio. So I actually get to espouse my own opinions, which I didn't before, as strictly like a newscaster, as a news anchor. You try to restrict your opinions, and you don't really editorialize, like CNN, right? Like I'm not Don Lemon. So I usually never got to inject my own thoughts or opinions on TV, but on radio, I do get to, it's talk radio. You get to espouse what you think, pose questions, and have a conversation. So I have lately, I guess the past year since I've been doing radio, also had an outlet for that, but it's not usually somebody actually asking me a question. That's just me kind of rambling about whatever I'm about to ask the guests.
Yeah, well, I've seen you on RT. I've been a fan of RTs for a long time, and I know it sounds like I'm a Russian agent if I say that, but I've throughout the past I've had.
I'm the Russian agent.
I'm undercover, and that's why I'm just a fan. I don't work there, but it's just to me. I remember just back in the day, like one of the first shows I really obsessively used to watch on like almost a regular basis was Breaking the Set with Abby Martin. Mm-hmm. It was a great show. She would have tons of people on there that I was a fan of, and people. I don't even know what year that was.
Music sometimes.
Yeah, music, because I've had her brother on quite a bit, Robbie, and
okay,
a great artist on there. And it would just be always tons of people. I mean, people that I've interviewed on this show, like Russ Baker and James Corbett and Jason Burmis and so many great people. And I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And it's on RT. And of course, at first you're like a little skeptical, but as you watch, you're like, I don't see anything here. Like these are all like the similar type of reporting and conversations I would expect if it was on any alternative media platform.
Yeah.
So
that was the thing. That was the thing. Everybody, like back then, though, in the Breaking the Set days, because I went to work there in 2014, June 1st, 2014. And back then, it wasn't like, oh, you're Russian agents. It wasn't that yet until like 2017 when the State Department put out their white paper, and that was when it became, a full-fledged like US, I would say it's like a US deep state war. And when they began their proxy war against Russia was in 2017 with their white paper, and they included RT and Sputnik. But prior to that, we were just any other alternative media outlet. There was no, stigma of like, oh, Russia, bad, America, good. They didn't have that back then. And people, they hated it, but RT America was really changing the landscape, I think, like the US media landscape. And I would say the argument is that the deep state and the mainstream media, the legacy outlets, didn't want that.
Yeah, well, sometimes I would send people videos, or I would tell them like, hey, watch Breaking the Set, or Lee Camp, Redacted Tonight, and another person who's been on the show, and I'm like, watch it, and they're like, oh, it's on RT, and I would tell them like, well, maybe if they're talking about Russian news and current events or geopolitical stuff that involves Russia, I'm like, I get you being skeptical maybe a little bit, but I'm like, it's American news. I'm like, they're literally, and if anything, you should be more open-minded to the fact like they're not going to hold back in exposing some corruption in America when it's sponsored by Russia. So I'm like, you're more likely to get a better perspective. And if you look at the people that were on the network, I'm like, oh, so you think Jesse Ventura's a Russian spy? You think Larry King's a Russian spy? I would tell people, I'm like, you guys, I'm like, you're literally just regurgitating what mainstream media is saying about RT. But yet, like, look at the people that are on there. Tom Hartman, who's like a very well-known, progressive at his show.
Ed Schultz, like,
so I'm like, they're all Russian spies? To me, it was just so silly. It was a perspective completely based on ignorance. They didn't really watch the shows or anything like that. And personally, when I'm constantly searching for, different perspectives and different opinions. I don't think there should be censorship on any of it. I think even if it was Russian propaganda,
right?
I want to hear the Russian propaganda, because they might, even if if it wasn't for moral reasons, for example, like if they were exposing American corruption and not exposing their own for non-moral reasons, just because they didn't like the American propaganda, so they wanted to expose it. I'm like, but you're still going to find some good news, even if it was for their own agenda, right? And it's just no different than like Fox News is exposing MSNBC, or MSNBC exposing something that Fox News reported on. Like, yeah, maybe they're doing it because they're tribalistic and they're part of a political party or agenda, but is it facts? Is it true?
Right.
Is it some, is the reporting accurate? I'm like, that should be the questions you should be asking. Many times people will dismiss something just because of who it comes from. And it's like, oh, well, he's a liberal, or he's a conservative,
right,
or he's a, oh, I don't like Tucker because of this, or because of, and I'm just like, okay, but is he right? And if he's like that, that's the problem about a lot of these issues, is that nobody actually talks about the issues. It's become, I guess it's probably always been like that, where people are very tribalistic. They defend their team till the end of time. And that's why I think other countries that have more political parties makes more sense. Because I always tell people, I'm like, if you agree with your political party, and you only have two, so I'm like, you have all these complex ideas and issues, and basically you can divide them into two groups, and that's it. I'm like, and you agree with that group on these complex issues, it doesn't make any sense.
Oh, I totally agree. And I'll tell you, the spin that they had, they being mainstream media, the spin that they took on RT America hiring faces like Larry King or Ed Schultz or Tom Hartman, the spin that they took on that was, oh, well, that's the Kremlin's way to try to legitimize themselves and make them appear like they're not a propaganda channel, and that they're hiring these, stalwart American names. So, it's to hide their propaganda. When it's like, why don't you ask Ed Schultz why he left MSNBC? Did anybody bother reporting that? I mean, I worked on Ed Schultz's I was his Girl Friday, basically. I was his on the street reporter, right? I was posted to Capitol Hill. I went to the campaign trail for various, I went on Trump's, Bernie's, and Hillary's. And what Ed had told me, and obviously he's passed away, God rest his soul, but why he left MSNBC was because, and this is going back to 2015, he was basically railroaded by management at MSNBC because he was stumping for Bernie. And that, long story short, is basically MSNBC's higher ups pulled him aside and was like, hey, you can't do that. Basically, we back Hillary, so you need to back off the bashing Hillary thing. You can't be supporting Bernie. We're backing Hillary, so you need to back Hillary. And he was like, screw you. They had a fallout. They started moving him around on different time blocks of the day. They started messing with his show. So I guess that was like a breach of contract. He found a way out, landed at RT. And he disclosed that to all of us that were, working on his team, was that he basically was in a way sidelined and censored. And so the media censorship really began, I would say, around that time, 2014, 2015, before Trump even came on the scene. And he was the big wrecking ball, I would say, that really ruined the paradigm for mainstream media. They, their hair was on fire when when he hit the scene. So, but if you talk to somebody like Ed Schultz back then, if anybody bothered to ask him what actually happened, instead of painting Ed as like, oh, Ed Schultz has gone crazy, he works for the Russians now. That was the story. But the real story was because corporate media censored him. They sidelined him. So, it's I agree with you that if we are supposed to be in a true democracy and there's freedom of speech, there's freedom of the press, then we as a people in America that are supposed to be the beacon of democracy, we should be able to decide for ourselves what we want to believe, even if it's like, hocus pocus magic stuff like Marianne Williamson is into. I mean, I think she's less into it now because she realized, the first time that she ran for president, that didn't really bode well. Like, let me sage the White House. That didn't go over well. But if people want to believe that, let people hear everything and decide for themselves. But the whole media cabal really just went all in on the state, went all in with Hillary Clinton, went all in with the Russiagate hoax that we've been subjected to for 6 years. What kind of free democracy is that if you have no real free press? So, it's just kind of a sad place to be. And it was a sad thing that I witnessed, because I went to RT myself because I used to work for a CBS affiliate in Yuma, Arizona. And I got in trouble for saying some stuff, saying some stuff about General Motors, who's a major advertiser at CBS. So I got in trouble, and I thought, well, you're trying to censor me, as a journalist, and I don't want that. This is not why I pursued journalism. This is not what journalism should be. This is unethical. And I wound up at RT America, and I loved it. It was the first time I didn't have somebody telling me what I can or cannot say, as long as they said it's the truth. That my managers basically said, bring receipts. That's it. Have the receipts. That's it. Nobody told me I can't say this about General Motors. I can't say this about, I don't know, Kellogg. I can't say this about, Smithfield Farms. They were like, no, if it's true, if it's noteworthy, report it. And that was it. So similar to Ed, but a lot less millions of dollars involved. I wound up at RT for the same reason as Ed Schultz.
Yeah, and why don't they make a big deal when they do have stories like that of censorship on mainstream media? Because you look at like what happened with Tucker, there's a lot of speculation, but a lot of people believe it's obviously because of how outspoken he was, and he was getting into the more controversial issues. And what I remember somebody telling me, they're like, oh, well, they're going to sell it anyways, and they wanted to get rid of him because he was going against getting into some deep waters with some controversial issues. I'm like, it was the biggest show on the platform. I'm like, that shows you that, like, if you're going to sell the business and you're literally getting rid of the biggest show on your platform, that the mainstream narrative and people not thinking for themselves is more important than even money. And, you
Yeah.
don't spark that awakening of, the average Fox watcher actually opening up and being more open-minded to some of these issues. But like Jesse Ventura had a very similar story. I'm pretty sure he told it when he was on this show years ago, when he talked about how, MSNBC told him, like, hey, you know what? Like, we don't want you talking about the Iraq war. We will pay you to stay at home if you can't go on TV. I'm sure you're familiar with the story. He basically had a contract with, I think it was MSNBC, to have a show on their network. And they told him, like, well, the one thing you can't talk about is the Iraq war because you've been very outspoken about being against or whatever. And he's like, no, I can't do that. So they're like, okay, well, we'll just pay you for your contract and you'll stay at home. And that's why he kind of went silent for a while. And that's why, regardless, where these political pundits stand on all these political little social issues, when it comes down to war and the big issues, like, everybody's kind of all on board. And Christy Lee had a similar story. I've had Christy Lee on, and she got censored because she was being outspoken. Ben Swan, I'm sure many people remember him being censored because he was going down some rabbit holes and being outspoken about his views. So this happens again and again. And like, I had Michael Millerman on. I don't know if you know Professor Michael Millerman. He was the first person to translate Alexander Dugin's books into English, and got censored and got kicked out of his university. And now he has his own university called Millerman University, I believe is what it's called. But he, this was a guy who just found Alexander Dugin, because Michael Millerman lives in Canada, but his family's Eastern European. And just really fascinated with Alexander Dugin and his philosophies and his perspectives, translates his books, and then next thing you know, he starts getting in trouble and they kick him out of the university. And to me, it's like, the more you censor somebody, the more they become the forbidden fruit. Like, I want to know, like, what's so dangerous about a philosopher that I can't listen to what he has to say. So of course I go down the Dugin rabbit hole, and I find him incredibly fascinating. And I've been open about it. I'm like, this guy has ideas, and he has, perspectives, and he has a very Russian point of view on things, which I want to hear that perspective, because obviously we're not getting that in America. And from I was born in Portugal, so as a European, like, I constantly love to hear, like, okay, this is what our media is saying, and this is our perspective from here, but what's, like, Portugal's perspective? Like, what's going on there? What is the news telling you there? So to me, like, it's really important to get all that information and then decide for yourself, like, what's truth or what makes the most sense. But basically, Big Brother is saying, you aren't capable of coming up with your own conclusions. We must do it for you. So we're going to filter out anything that doesn't agree with us. And, and that's dangerous, regardless if you agree with these people or not.
Oh, 100%. Going back to the Governor Ventura thing. And I love Jesse. And the way that you would try to discredit, he was, before Navy SEALs even existed, he was a Navy SEAL, right? He served in Vietnam. He saw war firsthand. Like, this is a combat veteran. Fast forward to him being, a world famous wrestler, right? Jesse the Body Ventura. And then obviously the governor of Minnesota. Like, how can you say that this guy is a Russian agent when he was obviously a combat veteran who's anti-war? It seemed like more and more apparent during the height of, I would say, the Obama administration, when they were trying to hunt down Osama bin Laden. They really didn't want people to hear the anti-war voices like Governor Ventura, which is obviously why MSNBC shut him out as well, and how he wound up at RT. He had been a guest before, but being a guest and having a show is a different thing. But if you fast forward now to the 10 years since then to now, we know, I think most people understand that the big military industrial complex companies like Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing, Bay Systems, I mean, I can go on and on, but they advertise on mainstream media. Anderson Cooper, brought to you by Pfizer and Boeing, right? Like, it's not a secret anymore. But back then, just 10 years ago, people would say you were crazy to say that CNN or MSNBC and regular NBC even that they were collecting millions of dollars a year in advertising, quiet advertising, from like a Lockheed. Like no one thought of it that way. But I would credit alternative media like RT America, like AJAM, and there's, different conversation to be had about Al Jazeera and, other, their involvement in some other things. But for the most part, alternative media on the bigger scale like that, down to nowadays we have podcasts like yours, like big ones like Joe Rogan. They are the ones bringing the truth out, because, it's like playing whack-a-mole. What happened to RT America, what happened to the whole of American media, I think they weren't prepared for the evolution of streaming, for the evolution of media cutting the cord. Like they thought that big cash cow, like you brought up Tucker being the biggest show on that network. He had something like 3.6 million, just under 4 million viewers on average per night. But if you go back a few years and you look at O'Reilly's numbers, I mean, that guy was a behemoth. He was like 6 million viewers straight up, day in, day out. That was a cash cow for them. And they fired him as well. But that was part, that generation that was strictly tied to cable. It has died or is dying off. The younger generation, we've all cut the cord. We have, I think, a little more intellectual curiosity, as you mentioned. I don't think, for the most part, most Americans are not as intellectually curious as, say, like you went around looking for different voices on purpose, right? I would say a lot of people stumble onto alternative media. They weren't necessarily looking for it. Like if you didn't see the RT bug at the bottom of Abby Martin's show, or on Ed Schultz's show, or on any of my show, you wouldn't know what you were looking at, right? Like you would say, oh, well, that topic is interesting to me. Let me just stay on it and listen. What are they talking about? But people are so easily manipulated by corporate advertisers, and the corporate advertising obviously influences what mainstream media says. And then your magazines and Facebook is influenced by the same corporate interests. So all of this creates this ecosystem of, even though people have the intellectual curiosity, they are still influenced by this whole ecosystem, because it's been carefully crafted the past 10 years. And that's really only happened the last 10 years. And that's what's kind of terrifying, I think, both to the old school content creators on, I guess if you want to call them that, on cable or on regular television. They still haven't grasped how they're going to combat smaller entities like yourself, independent podcasters, independent media. They haven't grasped how they're going to combat a behemoth like Joe Rogan that has like 20 million listeners, month in, month out. They don't know how to deal with that yet, because, when you saw the drama that recently happened with Rogan and the ivermectin thing and the whole, they don't know how to deal with that, because what people are learning from independent media is counter to what they're spewing on mainstream media, on legacy media, and the tens and tens of millions of dollars that are being invested into that message. They don't know how to counter that yet. So when they try to cut off, the head of RT America, they try to cut off Al Jazeera America, they, whatever, Press TV, sanction this country, sanction whatever. What they ended up doing is they didn't realize it was like a hydra, right? You cut off its head, another thing grows. Now it's not even that. It's whack-a-mole. It's whack-a-mole. Everybody is popping up with their own independent podcasts, journalism, citizen journalism, and people are starting to become more intellectually curious, because, as you said, they when you try to censor and you make forbidden fruit, people are like, ooh, why can't I know what's on RT? Why can't they air here? And people start seeking it out. So I think in a weird way, it was kind of, I would say, an intellectual awakening for a lot of Americans the last 2-3 years since COVID and the slow shutdown of alternative media. So in a way, it's kind of been a new birth of media, I would say.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you see shows like Breaking Points, though, that makes me a little nervous because people consider them alternative media.
No,
And
no,
I'm
they're
just
not.
like, Rogan will talk about them. And I don't know if you saw the recent RFK Jr. interview, and I'm just like, they've been off on COVID the whole time.
Yeah.
I have such respect for people like Jimmy Dore and other people who have come out. I mean, they don't realize that, like, people like Mickey Willis. I had Mickey Willis on the show. I mean, the extent they went to censor that pandemic documentary. And I think, they understood how important it was to censor it because that documentary made more sense what Judy Mikovits was saying and what Dr. David Martin was saying and all these people were saying in the documentary made more sense than what the TV was telling you. So they needed to censor it because people are watching this like, oh, this makes way more sense than what, the idiot on TV is telling me. So, Breaking Points, that's the thing. Like, people have to understand too that, like, you're gonna get shows like Breaking Points that seem like alternative media, and it's not. And they're gonna say, oh, we're funded by our viewership and all this stuff. And so to some people it sounds like, oh, RT is funded by Russian government, Breaking Points is funded by the listeners and watchers, so that must be way more independent, and that's not the case. And people have to be skeptical. That's why I love the fact on Fault Lines, you were always pretty outspoken about your opinions. I know the past guests on or past hosts on that show, and I think COVID was probably one of the reasons why they've had so much changing of guests, because the two previous ones used to butt heads a lot, and during COVID, and a lot of I think people were just so emotional and so anxiety driven that it was probably hard to just keep anybody talking 3 hours a day without being at each other's throats. But it's but I love the fact that you were outspoken against that, because I was curious if there was any pushback in regards to, like, hey, in regards to COVID or the vaccine, like, you got to stay within these lines. Did you ever see any censorship on RT? And it didn't seem like it, because you seem like you basically would state, when you would disagree, and you would push back when need be. So that's great. But I think COVID kind of did open a lot of people's eyes to how important censorship is, and how you got the Restrict Act now, and so but it's been going on forever. I've had Thomas Drake on. This has been going on forever. Dr. Robert Epstein, who's also been a Rogan podcast, he was on this show. I mean, his analyzing of how much control big tech has, Google specifically, but YouTube and Google, basically the two biggest search engines in the world. And so they control basically all the information, and nobody should have that much power. And then when people talk about, Russia and Trump and them affecting the election, I'm like, okay, here's something we know for certain, that without a doubt, a historically, I guess, traditional publication wanted to put out a story about Hunter Biden, and that was censored. And that might have swayed people's opinion on the whole situation. So if you censored that, aren't you in some way affecting the election? Our own government affected the election. So we do know for a fact that a government affected, the election, and it wasn't Russia. It was the U.S. government.
Yeah, that's the part that cracks me up the most. And I shouldn't, but I'm cynical and sardonic that way, that I think it's what irony, right? Like, so I mentioned before that when Ed Schultz was alive and I was his reporter, I was on the campaign trail in 2015, 16. And I went a little bit here and there with Trump. Well, not like officially with them, but I followed these campaigns, obviously, on the campaign trail. And I followed Trump. I followed Hillary to a couple spots. I followed Bernie to a couple spots. But during that time, there was no real fear or anything of the Russians. I'm telling you, it happened. Like, Trump, we know now because of this, the two investigations, right? Bob Mueller, and now we have the Durham report. We know now that the Russia hoax was, the source of it was the Hillary Clinton campaign. We know, like, ultimately you boil down the 50,000 layers that they put in there as a buffer between Hillary And the story, the Russiagate stuff, there might be 50,000 layers, but at the end of it, Hillary is the madam behind all of this, right? Prior to that, I was treated as a normal reporter. I was, I got interviews. I used to have a Capitol Hill press pass, right? I had 24-hour access to get into Capitol Hill. I used to stand in the rotunda next to Fox News on this side, MSNBC on this side, like just normal reporter stuff. After Trump was elected in 2016, so he's inaugurated in January 17, then a few months later, I want to say it was that summer of 17, that's when the State Department under Donald Trump put out their first white paper about disinformation. And mind you, Trump was the first one to talk about disinformation, fake news, right? I mean, I'll admit I was pretty scared when I was at Trump rallies because he did talk a lot of smack on media. And when crowds are angry, it's not like they're going to make any distinction between me holding an RT mic flag and MSNBC, right? Like when crowds get riled up, they get riled up. It doesn't matter that I'm not them, right? I'm alternative media. Like, doesn't matter. So I was a little afraid of that. But then when the white paper came out in the summer of 2017, and it specifically had whole pages about RT America, that was when everything changed. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I thought we were, alternative. And they said that nobody watched us. Why are we suddenly so dangerous? Like, we can't be both. Like, how did we help Donald Trump get elected? And this is supposed to be the State Department under Donald Trump. So it was, do you know what I mean? It was very confusing to me going, wait a minute. Their report was almost not only trying to damn RT America, but it was also damning the sitting president, of which they are part of this administration, that State Department, right? What they're alleging or implying in that white paper is that RT America helped get Donald Trump elected. So when I read that white paper, it was, I don't know, probably like 60 pages. It wasn't that long. It was like 60, 70 pages at most, including footnotes. But I was very confused by that white paper because, they're talking smack on individual people, different outlets. They had a couple of pages dedicated to us and Sputnik. But I was very confused by this being, wait a minute, this is the Trump administration, State Department, hating on us, but also hating on Donald Trump. I didn't know what was ahead of us from 17 on, right? Where what that was a prelude to Russiagate. That's when it all started. I didn't know then because we were, like 4 or 5 months into the Trump administration, but that was the prelude to the Russiagate hoax. And then it just caught fire. From that summer on, they were like, oh, wait a minute. RT America, they helped Donald Trump. And that's what was parroted all around everywhere. When I was going, me and Ed Schultz were looking at each other like, do they know that I learned to anchor to fill in on your show because Ed was campaigning for Bernie Sanders? How can they say that we're a pro-Trump network? They started implicating us in that. And that's when the gates of hell opened on us. I got my press passes revoked from everywhere around DC, just instantly. I got an email, then they sent a formal letter saying it's no longer valid. I'm not welcome there. I don't know what would have happened. I didn't try. Like, if I showed up at the rotunda and was like, okay, I'm going to set up shop. Can I do that as a private individual? Or am I just blacklisted? I didn't try. And I'm probably better off for not having tried, because had I known how anti-Russia they were going to be for the next several years, I can only imagine I'd have been mired in court cases and thrown in jail or something. Like, I don't know, called a spy, legitimately.
The extent that they went to ban everything Russian related. You had sports athletes just banned. You had Russian soccer clubs banned from like the Europa League and the Champions League. You had, I mean, you had the owner of Chelsea Football Club have to sell the team just because he's Russian. Like, it didn't make any sense. I'm like, the thing is, like, the people, not all the people of Russia, even if they agree or disagree, like, either way, you can't determine like their personal opinions on the government of Russia. Just like when we invaded Iraq, there's plenty of American citizens that weren't for the war, protested the war, and they would appreciate if you didn't think that the invasion of Iraq and getting involved in Afghanistan represented their personal views just because it was their government.
Right. Next, we have this clip from Craig Pasta and his question for Robert F. Kennedy.
The Democratic National Committee made such a drastic decision to reshuffle the calendar and to do it the way they did, waiting for the last second, leaving the local New Hampshire delegation in the dark. What do you think was up there?
I think that I think President Biden has never done well in New Hampshire, and that they wanted to make sure that they had a sequence that would benefit him. And I mean, I understand that. But I don't think it's good for our country, and I don't think it's good not only for our local democracy here, but the kind of moral authority of America around the globe to have parties pick the candidate, without the involvement of the public or with as little involvement, and the optics that it's really a fixed game, I don't think is good in this country, and it's like the Soviet system. I think a lot of people think that, and that's not good for us internationally either.
So Congressman Clyburn was right. This was about avoiding embarrassment.
Yeah, he said it.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Mr. Kenny, a lot of people are confused about the tweet storm. I call it the tweet heard around the world. A couple tweets were put up in support of Roger Waters and then taken down. Do you want to give us a little explanation of why they were taken down and also your stance on Israel and Palestine?
Yeah, I tweeted that. I made the tweet applauding Roger Waters' courage in opposing the COVID mandates and the Ukraine war. I was unaware of his position on Israel. And when I learned that, I immediately took it down. My position of Israel is that I support Israel. My family has a long relationship with Israel. I support its right to exist and its right to protect its security.
And the Palestinians?
And a humane outcome and a recognition ultimately of the aspirations of the Palestinian people is important for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Which are good for you right now? I mean, is it name recognition or something else? What do you make of that?
I really don't know. I mean, I saw a CNN analysis, which I don't know whether you trust it or not, but it looks like it's a conspiracy of different causes, including name recognition. I think there's also an appetite in this country for something different, something outside of what people are being offered by essentially what is now a uniparty. I think people want something different.
You spoke to the Senate about reaching independence in New Hampshire. Where do you hope to find them? How do you hope to reach independence in New Hampshire?
Well, I think I'm already reaching independence. I mean, our polling shows that I'm doing better among independents than any of the other candidates. So I think I'm going to keep doing what we're doing, which is, talking about the war on the middle class, the warfare state and surveillance states, rebuilding our industrial base, and focusing America's wealth on building a strong economy at home, which is the best national security strategy as well.
Considering your upcoming appearance at PorkFest, a Free State Project festival, would it be fair to assume that you are reaching out specifically to the libertarian movement in New Hampshire?
I welcome support from the libertarians, and I have tremendous support in that cohort.
That the two leading insurgent candidates, you and Donald Trump, in the polls also have similar positions on the war in the Ukraine.
Well, I think we both have populist positions. And, you know, I think when President Trump was in office, he did many of he laid the groundwork for the Ukraine war. So he walked away from the intermediate nuclear weapons treaty. He began integrating operations to create interoperability between NATO forces in the Ukraine, which the Russians said was a red line. They put the Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland, and I think you know, those were things that were mistakes that may have avoided the war.
I'm just looking at it in terms of what it reflects about how the American people feel about the war in Ukraine.
Well, I think, you know, listen, I think a lot of my positions are populist positions that appeal to people on the left and right. And the same was true with my dad. You know, when my father ran in '68, he got a populist coalition. He had whites, blacks, Hispanics, and basically people who had been alienated and left out of the system. And I think there's more and more Americans who feel that way today. 4 years later, most of the white, or large numbers of those whites who had voted for my father in '68, voted not for George McGovern, but for George Wallace. So, you know, what I learned from that is that that every movement and every nation and every individual has a darker side and a lighter side, and that the easiest thing for a politician to do is to appeal to people's greed and anger and fear and xenophobia and hatred and bigotry. But those same people can oftentimes respond to a message of idealism. And so I think, you know, there's a lot of discontent people in this country who like Donald Trump because they're angry, and they should be angry because nobody's listening to them. And he's a guy who likes to break things. And a lot of those people feel like we want somebody, because we're angry, who is going to break things. But I think that we can also appeal to the better angels and the same people by saying we're going to create something, you know, rather than just breaking things.
Mr. Kennedy, you know, you can ask William Weld, the former Massachusetts governor, taking on an incumbent president is a big uphill task. Are you going to have the resources to effectively campaign against Joe Biden?
Yeah, we will have the resources.
Is there anything you can share on how things are going?
No, but I think we have to do our filing. And Dennis, when do we do our financial filing? I think at the end of June.
Yeah.
We'll do our first financial filing, but we're happy with the fundraising.
And down the road, if this eventually is unsuccessful and Joe Biden is renominated by the Democrats as their standard bearer in 2024, will you be supporting him in the general election next year?
I expect to be nominated, and I don't have a plan B.
What's your biggest objection to Joe Biden's first term?
The biggest objection, I think, you know, I have two big objections. One, inviting neocons in to engage in a very belligerent and destructive foreign policy, and then inviting Wall Street in to, you know, to governor, to craft our domestic policies which leave out virtually all of the middle class.
Mr. Kennedy, recently on an interview, you said that your uncle has more streets named after him in Latin America than any other president that's held office. What is your position on Cuba? Are you willing to get rid of the blockade on day one?
Yes.
End the blockade completely?
Yes. Yeah, the blockade has kept the Castro brothers in office for 60 years. And it's not good for the Cuban people, and it's not good for democracy. It's not good for the view of America anywhere in the world. And, you know, we need to change. We need to change the policy. What we've been doing has not been working.
Yeah. Thank you.
President Biden's age is a legitimate question that voters should ask. Do you think that President Biden has the mental and physical skills he needs to conduct the job as president for 4 more years?
You know, I'm going to let other people answer that. I think all of you guys and the American public can make a judgment about that as well as I can.
Has he been a good president so far?
I don't think. I don't think so. In my view, I think the war was a huge mistake for our country. I think we should have stayed out of it. I think we could have settled. I think we pressured the Ukraine into that war. And, and that's not excusing Vladimir Putin, who invaded illegally the Ukraine in a brutal invasion. But I think we have to look at the actions that we took to provoke those actions, and that we had opportunities to do something different.
Now let's jump to this clip with Ryan Christian from The Last American Vagabond.
And overall, I will start with the general point of East Palestine, because it's just incredible how this topic is continually, it's not even just ignored. It's actually really incredible to watch how this entire situation has gone down. That it's something that there's so many contradictory points to all this, that we're in a situation where you have people that are just almost irrationally screaming about the idea of the environment. And of course, we should care about the environment being polluted and manipulated, of course, by the leading polluters in the world, primarily the military of the US government. But we don't talk about that in the context of concerns for the environment. They frame that as somehow means to an end to justify freedom, which is therefore necessary to create more environmental freedom, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, ESG only applies when we don't, I'll actually make a point about ESG in a moment. But it's really, it's amazing. It's like the masks, right? Where we can see people that are screaming that we're hurting the planet, but then because they have some rationalization about why it's necessary, despite the evidence, while they scream trust the science, that they were wearing masks and gloves, and which, by the way, we now see is probably one of the most obvious point. I mean, it's overwhelming. And there's a reason that you don't hear how serious it actually is in the short period of time that masks were aggressively used, how dramatically that destroyed the oceans and the sea life. And I mean, it's incredible, the microplastics and everything else involved. And yet it's odd that nobody talks about that, because the same people telling you they have to control your lives to help the environment are the ones that are promoting the use of the things that are to the most degree right now hurting the environment. You see this everywhere right now. I made this point the other day. You have the racists. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are racist that they're pointing at, but you have this block of people that are acting with inherently racist tactics, that you're different because of your skin as a white person, that you are only racist if you're white. All these things that regardless of how you feel, that just if it's justified in your mind, that is the definition of racism. So you have people that are pushing inherently racist concepts and calling everybody else racist. You have anti-fascist groups acting with open fascism. It's just everywhere you look. You have people out there pointing out, it's the same kind of point, but they're all anti-Semitic as they're actually subjugating and suppressing and attacking Jewish people in Israel. Yes, we're talking about the Israeli government, or Semites everywhere else in the world, or any number of completely ridiculous contradictory tactics. Back to East Palestine, isn't it interesting that they, I was playing a clip today about Biden. And it's this, actually, I think I could probably pull it up. Let me see if I've got it real quick, since this is, reasonably informal today. It was a clip that I recently shared. And my point was not that I care about the token visit of Biden to East Palestine. Like, what is he even going to do? Why do we really care that Trump or Biden show up? It's all politics. It's meaningless. They don't need to be there to execute things these people need. It's all politics, right? So I don't really care at all about whether or not he visits physically, other than the fact that it just shows that he's at least there to the illusory idea that he cares about these people. But for me, it's more about the idea that he's repeatedly lied about it. And I think that's actually really important. Not that we should be surprised that the government lies, or all of the politicians, whether you think they're politicians or not, actively lie to you on a regular basis. But it's still interesting to see this repeated lie. And then, of course, the most frustrating and insulting part of it, again, that it's nothing unique to it's not unique to a certain party. It's not unique to a certain White House press secretary. It is just what they do. But the embarrassing nature of how people continue to toe that line, obfuscate the reality. So here's this clip. Just, I mean, there's no misunderstanding how obvious this is. Yeah, we'll go, yes, he's going to do it. Yes, he said he would. Yes, he'll follow up. And now it seems that we're just moving on to other topics. So repeated promises that he'll absolutely do it. He's somebody, the president that keeps his word. He'll be there and then doesn't do it. Again, that's not unique at all. That's just Tuesday for politics in the Washington, D.C. on either side of this. But it shows you something. And I think people are beginning to truly recognize how dishonest they are.
Discussion that the president may go there in the near future.
I just don't have anything to share. I know there's a lot of interest on that.
Has it been something that's even under consideration?
By the way, there's points. I can't stop pointing out how she's so bad at this job. And it shows you, again, it's kind of one of these points we're making. Like, it's inherently racist to put somebody in a position because of their skin color or because of their sexual identity. Literally, regardless of whether she's good at the job, I can promise you, and I can prove to you, there are people that were in fact in line for that job that were way better credentialed, experience-wise, and yet she got picked. Now, why is that? They'll tell you why. Because she's black and she's a lesbian. Because we want equality and diversity. So that's racism. Period. It doesn't matter your justification. You are making choices based on people's skin color and sexual identity. What else do you call that? Oh, excuse me, we're in the age of altering definitions to meet the agenda or the narrative, right? Herd immunity, vaccination, equality. But she'll say a lot of things in here that are bad, was my point. That, for instance, I love how she has these tactics that's clearly somebody who knows how to do this job is trying to give her little tidbits like, let me make something clear. She says that all the time and then goes on to be like, what am I going to say next? Which it's so inherent. That's just filling time. Let me make something clear, and then goes on to say something completely belligerent and completely not lacking even her understanding. Like the idea that she doesn't even understand who Mr. Munchkin is. Oh, excuse me, Mnuchin. She says that twice. Like, it's just incredible. Sorry, I shouldn't be just personal. It's worth making fun of, because this shows you, not just for the point of making fun of somebody, but it shows you the inherent ridiculousness of our governmental structure on all sides, by the way. Yes, this one side of it happened, like the idea of the identity politics is unique for the most part to one side, but you have just as much the level of ridiculousness in different ways on either side of the parties. And anybody paying attention sees that very clearly.
I mean, I think what folks should understand and what folks should, I think, feel at ease is that the president has taken this very seriously.
Oh, okay, so we should feel at ease that he's taken it seriously. What does that even mean? See, it's meaningless noise. Taken it seriously? In what ways? Explain for me how he's taken it seriously. He's done nothing different than any other president. This is the same point. It's always. It's just noise.
Simply not meet the bar for a presidential visit?
Look, I want to be very clear here. There's no reason to struggle.
What does that even mean? Let me be very clear here, and then struggle to say something that makes any sense.
Visit Ohio to discuss the situation there with the trade zone with people there for federal assistance.
I've spoken with every official in Ohio, and I will be answering some questions.
Is there a plan for him to go?
I don't have any trips to preview for you at this time. He's been to Ohio many times before during his...
For the podcast, the dates are changing progressively with every shift of the clip. So we're on March 3rd, starting in February. I'll be there at some point. Like, look, plans change. I'm not being ridiculous about this. Things can happen, especially for the president with so many things going on. But the only point here is just repeatedly saying you're going to do it, and then eventually just come out and be like, look, guys, I'm not going to make it. I've got other things going on. Instead, you just keep kicking the can down the road. Now, it's not even that big of a point. It happens on all sides of politics, but it just shows you that there is an inherent nature of dishonesty. Whether you think that is some kind of means to an end to do what's right, you won't understand, or, that's the way they play this. That they can't fill you in, national security, because you just don't understand, or it's not safe for you. It's all noise and nonsense and narrative. The bottom line is they lie to you all the time because they want to achieve their goals, period. Now, the most important thing to realize is those goals are not in your interest, but that's a whole other step in the conversation.
Administration, so it's not unusual for him to go there. Look, I don't have anything to preview.
Are there any plans for President Biden to visit East Palestine?
I don't have anything to share on a
March
planned
6th.
visit for the president to Ohio.
Democrats are saying it's time for him to get down here.
And he said, when he was asked the question, that he will be there.
When is he going to be visiting East Palestine, and why hasn't he yet?
So the plans are underway, discussions are underway, just don't have anything locked in.
About 5 weeks ago,
April
President
10th.
Biden said that he would be going to East Palestine, Ohio at some point.
Does the president still feel the need to visit Ohio?
Well, the president, once the president said it, so I will keep that, he keeps to his word.
So we should expect him there at some point.
If he says, the president said he's expecting to at some time, the president means what he says. I just don't have a trip to preview at this time.
Great. So as long as he goes there sometime between now and his death, then according to her, he keeps his word. You understand? That's honesty from the government. It's just quite silly, isn't it? Now, there's so many things that we could get into regarding East Palestine that are just it's overwhelming to see how obvious this is. Before I get into that, I want to do a quick shout out to the upcoming event that's tonight. Technically, is the VIP event. I'm not actually sure what that entails. If that's only the people performing, I'm not actually sure. As those of you guys know, I'm only speaking and playing. I'm not actually involved with the administrative side of all of this. This is and by the way, Courtney Turner deserves all the credit for all the work that's gone into this, as well as Scott, who had helped up until a point. They've worked their asses off to make this happen. So make sure you check this out. I don't know if they're doing like ticket sales at the door, how that works, but if you haven't gotten one yet, check it out, because tomorrow is the first day. I'll be performing tomorrow. I think it's like 4 p.m. ish. I'm sure that's subject to change based on how these events tend to go. But as you see, there's a lot of people that will be there performing, a lot of people that have been added. And I mean, you could see for yourself, guys, that there's plenty of people in here that I'm sure we disagree with on plenty of different things. And that's the best part about this. You need to have different perspectives and different people, because that's the only honest way to do this, and not have it be negative and vitriolic. Oh, you're a different, the point being is that people who perceive the other side as the enemy are, in my opinion, either being fooled or part of the problem. Because I'm not saying that there aren't some people on the other side, whatever that means, that might actually be the enemy. But the bottom line is, your neighbor, who just because might, be swayed by the narrative or have a political standing that's different, doesn't mean that they're. The point is, we as the country, we are the people of this country. Your government is the active effort to try to subjugate these people. All of them. I was making this point earlier, actually, and now that since I went into that, make sure, by the way, you check this out. Go to the website here, rebelsforcause.com. You can put in TLAV, promo code TLAV, and get, support the Last American Vagabond and so on. Before we go back to Scott C. Smith stuff, since I'm mentioning that, I'm going to go into this video, which is pretty crazy. There was something else about the government. Where was that? I just threw these together. I'll come back to some of this stuff. Well, Vigilant Fox points something out that I thought was really concerning, which we've heard more about, but as this continues to increase, the more invasive actions of your government continuing to show you that you are the problem. Of course, they'll tell you, well, he writes here, new Supreme Court ruling allows the IRS to now access your bank records secretly. The point is, we shouldn't. That's just now we see that. Are we under the impression that they've not already been able to do that? Well, that's the point, is they haven't been legally able, but now they can secretly without your knowledge. And the point is, why does that make sense? Because you are the problem. You're the enemy. You're the potential thief. You are the potential criminal. Because how else do they make this work? They can't just continue to point outside the country, because the problem is they need to control your lives. Because you are the issue. Because we are pointing at the government right now more than ever in this country's history, as far as I can tell, and saying, look, they are the problem. They don't represent us anymore. They don't care about our safety. They say a lot of things, but then they act against them on a regular basis. Meanwhile, they're murdering people overseas in unprecedented levels in your name. And now, because I'm saying that, now the IRS is secretly looking at my bank account. Now, is that what happens in a democracy? If that's even what we should want, let alone a republic? A free society? No, that's what happens in an authoritarian, totalitarian government. A technocratic state going forward aggressively. Quote, it is now completely legal for the IRS to secretly obtain bank records of third-party individuals who are not under federal investigation. How does that make sense? Isn't there a legal standard where you're supposed to? Well, no, it doesn't matter. They can just decide one day, maybe on political standing, which, by the way, we've already seen the IRS deciding to audit people based on politics. It's a virus, guys. You talk about the woke mind virus. How about the political mind virus? The idea that we're simply living through the reality of how politics is a problem. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that I mean that in the sense of the way we perceive the political game today. There's a different, if you look up like the definition of the word politicking, whatever you want to talk about, it's necessary in the concept of engaging with other people in a society to come to like a parliamentary kind of republic concept where you can have people of a community coming together, deciding what everybody wants like that. There's no way around that. Even from an anarchistic society, that's ultimately what we would be talking about to some degree, varying, different. The problem, though, is when you get the career politicians, the people that are not just doing it as a public service. People aren't just standing up and doing it because, they want to fill a role to help better the society, but because they see a benefit in it, right? It's advantageous for them to not just play the role while they're also running a business. No. Some of them, maybe still today, but most of them are career politicians. That's what they do. That's not how this was originally even set up, guys. The whole concept, even like media for crying out loud, it was supposed to be a public service. There wasn't profit. It was tax dollars that were used to do a public service to inform people 1 hour a night about what was going on. Even then, I guarantee it was being manipulated to some degree. But the point was, it got very quickly turned into a profiteering business, like everything else, like your medicine, like your hospitals, like your prisons, all at your expense, all of it. So we live in a world right now where we have a bunch of career politicians that are actively doing things at your expense to benefit lobbyists and a lot of other concerning things that we can get into, but would be a lot bigger conversation. The globalist concepts, all the different varying and, the technocrats, the neocons, and all these different overlapping agendas, all of which just want to control your life. If the IRS is trying to collect back taxes from your friend, well, they can still pull up your bank records as well. That's what it looks like to be completely unaccountable. This is the direct text from the ruling. The Supreme Court has ruled unanimously that it's lawful for the IRS to secretly obtain bank records of third parties, not just because they're looking at you, but just tangentially be like, how about them too? That's like when they say, hey, give us all the bank records, all of the transactions of literally anybody in the DC area between the 5th and the 7th. Why? Well, because January 6th. Does that make sense to anybody? Maybe if you're all wrapped up in the fervor of the argument that it was some sort of insurrection, as opposed to the most obvious psychological operation that I think I've ever seen, now that it's all fleshed out with hundreds of FBI agents, with multiple people on the ground from different parts of the government, the military. You have examples of both Antifa, or rather just left-leaning groups screaming on the record, we got them, we tricked them, we did this. And on top of that, you have Ukrainians there screaming in Russian that are acting like they're Russians, and the Ukrainian military putting out videos claiming, look, Russians did it. It was the most obvious thing I've ever seen in my life. And what they do, they swept up anybody anywhere that was even remotely there. And maybe you're still being investigated. Oh, and then guess what? Every one of those people are going under the tally of the category of white supremacy Nazi investigations, which then they point at and go, oh my God, look at how this has exploded. There's Nazis and white supremacists everywhere. Why? Because you investigate somebody based on being present at a time with a 3-day period that might not have been related to that. But yes, that's what's happening. And the FBI agents that have testified to that are being persecuted, attacked, threatened. And you should question them too. Certainly possible they're lying, but there's more than enough evidence to realize that they're not. Wild. Now, on the concept of East Palestine, it's very clear to me that there's more to this story. One of the things I was interested in getting into, in his opinion, is, what else is really going on here? Sorry, I was looking at something else. Because I talked about the time in the beginning, the time frame where this was unspoken for almost 10 days. There was basically zero coverage of this. I'm still asked the question of, I wonder what else was on that train. In my personal experience, doing this for well over a decade, I don't see things like that unless there's typically something that ties to national security. That ability to kind of completely black out coverage, even at a time when seemingly everybody everywhere has got cell phones and access to immediate coverage, right? Doesn't make much sense. As well as the fact that the government was there, the EPA, Norfolk Southern, multiple government representatives. Why didn't anybody talk about this? Why wasn't this with that level, with that picture? Just going to show you again for those that maybe, if you haven't seen this picture, by the way. Oh, let's see. Actually, this will be easier. We'll load faster. This picture here. It just is absolutely unreal to see that this is what was going on after the so-called controlled burn. And even then, it was still being pushed back on. Now, one of the things I wanted to get into with Scott Smith was about the testing, which he is finding, as I've shown you many times. Even The Guardian was pointing this out back on March 17th. That data from multiple places, Texas A&M, Scott Smith, we've shown you at least 4 different other independent experts that have been present on the grounds. Some of them I don't know what they're doing now. It seems like they just stopped talking about it, investigating. I'm not sure. Maybe it's happening. We don't see it, but they've all found the same thing. Levels of dioxins that are dramatically higher than they should be, as well as many other chemicals, and nobody cares. And in fact, not just don't care, but the EPA literally says the opposite. They straight up still, and this is what's so crazy. It's almost as if people hear this and go, no, that can't be. Yes, as of right this moment. It's actually, God, it's just crazy to me to think about. There's so many different things to get into, but right this moment, the EPA is literally maintaining the idea that this is not dangerous, that there's nothing going on, that nobody is actually sick from what happened on that train, despite the reality that, I mean, this is from June. This is from yesterday. My kids have been sick for 3.5 months. Oh, perfect correlation to when this actually started, right? I mean, it's actually really unnerving to go through this stuff, as we just went through the other day. This is from May 29th. Independent testing finds dangerous chemicals at a farm well outside the area that was supposed to even be dangerous. Like they gave you a 3-mile area radius, or actually, I think it was less than that. This farm was 3 miles out. I think it was only a mile. I forget the actual number they used, but the bottom line, we've shown you evidence just with dioxins, which again, it's not up for debate. What they did with this, wherever it was, 100%, without question, caused a massive surge of dioxins in the environment, as well as everything else that happened. The not controlled burn of the vinyl chloride, the way that they dumped it, the way that it went into the soil. And this is all combining. And I really think that not just dioxins or one or the other. It's all combining to make this a toxic area. I mean, how else do we explain this? Everybody's sick in the area. Their kids are sick. They can't breathe properly. They're having rashes still to this day. They've had people that have been tested and their doctors have confirmed chemical bronchitis. Animals, more than we could. I mean, I've covered at least 10 plus different locations and have 3 examples now of people that have been seen by veterinarians who say this is chemical poisoning. Nothing. They must be lying. I bet the doctors must be conspiracy theorists. Sounds familiar. It's incredible. So 3 miles away, and they weren't even allowed to get testing paid for by Norfolk because, well, they're outside the area. Well, I've showed you plenty of times in general that even just dioxins. This is from 1995. Dioxins may be creating a larger problem down the road. I've shown you this many times. 1995. But yet nobody seems to care about that. Grab this one before I forget. Was it Arctic? There it is. We'll go to that one next. The point is that they found, CNN of all places, found speaking to an expert about dioxins, the thing that everyone seems confused about today, despite all the investigation happening long before this, and they knew it was dangerous, they knew it was a problem, and yet today they're like, what's dioxin? What is that? What do you mean? We don't need to test for that. It's really insulting to your intelligence. It says very clearly that when they looked into this stuff, they looked into fast food, hamburgers, chicken, pizza. We're talking Pizza Hut, Big Macs, right there, Kentucky Fried Chicken. You know what they found? In the food and the wrappers and everything else around it, that about 8 to 150 times more dioxins than the EPA felt would be safe. I mean, how do you even read something like that, realize that they did absolutely nothing, it actually got way worse since then, and pretend that they're here to help you? Now, the point is not only just that problem, but that they report even here, which I've proven, it's not just CNN saying this, that when dioxins move into our, it's right here, when they become airborne, as dioxins become airborne, they travel thousands of miles away. Dioxin, and again, we're dealing with TCDD, which, as anybody will tell you, that was anybody, not even if they're being honest, and nobody will dispute this. TCDD is just about, I'm not even say that, as far as I can tell, the most dangerous chemical that we know of. That's Agent Orange. Again, that's why they used it, because it was a chemical weapon. It wasn't about the foliage. They used 20 times the amount. It was a weapon. The same reason it was used to try to assassinate a Ukrainian president. You can look that up on Wikipedia. And yet somehow they're like, what's that? We're confused. That's national security for you. The reality is this is a problem. So when you see things like this, that went thousands of miles. It's not up for debate. And then back to the point, that's what they're finding. Scott C. Smith and everyone else, they're finding levels of dioxins that are dangerously above the level of safety. The Guardian can write this, and yet we're still being told we're lying by the EPA. Again, that doesn't mean because the Guardian writes it, it's true. It just shows you that even the corporate media is pointing this out. They're telling you newly released data from independent experts, multiple, have found chemical dioxin levels hundreds of times greater than the exposure threshold, which they tell you will cause cancer. Hundreds. And then, of course, while that's happening, they'll go, you're fake news. We again have people saying, I've been sick for 3 months. We have people that are vomiting blood. We have people that have rashes that are oozing things out of their face. I'm not making this up, guys. I've shown you all this. And yet, somehow, it's fake news. That's where we are today, guys. I mean, what that shows you, from my perspective, is not just that they're exposed, but that they're desperate. They don't have another move. So if we all see it, it's right in front of us. You even have a corporate media to some degree pointing it out. You got independent experts testing and going, yep, they're right. And they go, you're wrong. Let's point over there. UFOs. Look at what's happening here. That's desperation, guys. That's losing control of the narrative. We need to do something about that. Just like with the COVID-19 conversation, we have all the tools in front of us right now to do something. And you know what's stopping that? The aggressive two-party illusionists. All of the pundits out there that are desperately holding on to this dying structure because it makes them relevant. It makes them popular. It makes them money. Or just because they buy it because they're lost. The bottom line is that the two-party illusion and all the people screaming at the top that we need to vote for Trump or DeSantis or anything else within this broken system, while the other side is all, it's why we don't see this stuff. Why do the people standing up about this not get any attention? Where are all the large pundits out there that are, where is this? Why is it in the conversation? This is one of the most obvious environmental catastrophes I've ever seen in my life, and the ongoing consequences are right in your face. Now, somebody brings up the land grab, and that's a great point to make because that's an interesting conversation. The very beginning of this, I don't know why it was such a weird push by some people. Quite honestly, it felt very dishonest to me that it was only about that there was no problem. There's no sickness, It was all fake. Well, possibly. I guess only if you choose to omit and ignore all of the evidence of everything we've talked about that we've proven 50 times over. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the idea of the land grab. We shouldn't just pretend that means that's all that's happening. I'm not sure why people feel it's important to just grab onto one thing they think and ignore everything else. It's obvious people are sick. It's obviously something happened. But it's possible that was all what it was for. I think it's bigger than that. But we see it happening. We see them right now telling people they're going to be bought out. And then, of course, we're going to find out, I mark my words, that it will not be value that they should be getting. The full value of their homes. I'm willing to bet you anything that it will come out and it will be what they think it's worth based on the current value, which is the absolute opposite of what they promised. So you ruin everything and then get to pay them half the price for their homes. That's a benefit to you. We'll see what happens. Because, don't forget where this is. It's a very important agricultural area. There's all sorts of things that tie into bigger agendas, and we should not dismiss that. The other point about this was, again, just to show you, and again, this is just the dioxin point. I only focused on this because it seems to be the most obvious problem and one of the most obviously high-level problems. It's the top, as far as I can tell. Again, showing you they've known about this. This is September 2000. They did a study on the dioxins and how it spreads. Again, showing you they know that once it goes in the air, like this, it goes thousands of miles. So the point is, they did a study on this. The long-range air transport of dioxins from North America sources. So they're making it very clear. Yes, it's coming from. So why don't we know that if it's that dangerous? Because I think these companies, these groups, these independent, agencies, regulators have been co-opted and taken over and captured a long time ago. The FDA, we just watched that happen. The EPA clearly doesn't care about your safety, both with this and everything else we've talked about. It's incredible. Now, I'm not even saying that they may not even know that. Who knows how that works? But the truth, the reality, what's happened and what they haven't done despite the reality is not up for debate. The point is, they know it's coming from North American sources that are making people right next to them absolutely sick, especially if they know that thousands of miles away in the Arctic, that it's also making people sick. How is it possible you could not tell the Americans that are living next to the source that they're in danger when you're going, yep, these women breastfeeding in the Arctic are passing high levels of dioxins to their babies because of North American sources and the way the wind blows? Really take a minute to think about how crazy that is. And I went over this in depth in a previous show. The bottom line is that the problem of dioxins is going through the air sources all the way to the Arctic, and within 500 kilometers in any direction, there is not a dioxin source in this area. Then none of it, nor Arctic Canada. These Inuit families, the breastfeeding of their children with dioxins because of this. And yet we're being told nothing's wrong. That's not even to get into the other things he's finding. And that's one of the points I wanted to get into him with, is that he's finding all sorts of things. As he says here, this is just the families telling them that they won't even answer their questions. So the government, the EPA, the media, Norfolk, they all tell us, yeah, we're here for everything. We're paying for everything. We're answering every question. And every single person you talk to, I have no idea what's going on. I ask, they won't answer. I won't even get responses. It's like pulling teeth. They can't even get answers. This guy says, my vision is blurry. I like cognitive issues. He can't remember stuff. He's had shortness of breath, throat issues like he burned his throat this entire time. He still has them as of the last time this article was posted. Now, Scott Smith is telling you there are 50 different chemicals where what he's telling you is from petroleum-related compounds that appear to only come from very intense coal factories, which, again, would the same point. So he's saying coal burning, which would indicate that this is from, which I'm willing to believe that this was misquoted. I've heard him point out it's not a controlled burn, and it's not a question. Beyond doubt, it is an uncontrolled burn. By definition, there's no oxygen controlled flow. It's not a controlled burn. But the point is that they finding that, as well as a host of dioxins present, well, as we just showed you, hundreds of times above the level that should be safe. Now, what he's telling you is that they're consistent with the people showing symptoms. It's a very clear pattern. If you're closer to these chemicals they're finding, then you have the symptoms. If you're not, then they don't. If you're any investigator out there, you know what this is. Right? That's not proof, but it's correlation. But the obvious reality with that, with all the evidence of the testing, with the symptoms that we're supposed to be seeing, with things that they said were spilt, with the fact that everything, the only thing that's going against the reality here is the EPA saying, nope, not happening. End of story. So there's plenty of evidence. All the side effects, the overlap with everything that's happening, what was spilled, all the stuff we've proven it, the tests that people's have, the doctor and diagnoses of the problems, but no, EPA says fake news. End of story. That should make your blood boil, as it does mine.
Our next clip is from Scott Armstrong and his interview with Dr. Tom Cowan.
Why I really want to focus on this topic, because it's literally the Achilles heel. It's the thing that could...
Right, and they made a mistake by basing this on such an easily disproven concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know, if you don't mind, I just wanted to talk to you about one more thing real quick, and I'll let you go. Of course, I want to get into the whole, this is another big claim, and maybe we'll save this for another day. Not claim, but something that I really would love to learn more about is the idea that the heart is not a pump. But we'll save that for another day. Because that's fascinating stuff. But the question I do have is, I heard you talk about this, and I think that this is really something that we could leave the people with. The current medical paradigm is really foundationally constructed around making the patient the victim, right? It's like, it's your genes or your heredity or your outside, anything external outside of yourself is the cause of your dis-ease or whatever ailment you particularly have at the moment. And there's no conversation, or I've heard you characterize it as there's almost an unwillingness or a fear around putting any sort of blame on the patient. Right. It's like taboo to say, hey, man, maybe you shouldn't do it. You know what I mean? Or something like that. Like, could you speak to that for a minute? Like, how do we remove the victim consciousness from health?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue the case, and I have a good friend who does this, that there's only one disease, and that's victim consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And we have it drummed into us in medical school that, you never blame the patient. It's never the patient's fault. It's never what the patient does, except if they smoke. Then it's their issue.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's either germs, bad luck, or genes. That's it. And so you can't do anything about it. You just go to the doctor. The thing is, when you start investigating, like the genes, the whole theory is just riddled with nonsense. So they say the genes make your proteins, you're made of proteins. DNA is a series of genes, right? And that determines who you are, and it's the engine of evolution and heredity and all that, right? We've all heard that. So then they do this Human Genome Project, find out there's about 200,000 proteins, 20,000 genes, and if anybody knows arithmetic, that means there's 180,000 proteins that are not coded for by genes. So how in the hell did they get there? And if that's true, where is the code for these proteins? And anyways, if you follow that, you can see that the whole DNA is heredity, is the engine of evolution, is the code for protein, is completely make-believe.
Wow. Yeah, it's intense. It's all the work you do, like the conversations I've heard you have. It's and of course, your podcast, Dr. Tom Cowan and Friends. It's like you're having these discussions that really just fundamentally shake everything that we've thought of to the core. And it's like we have to go back and question everything. And I love that. That's been my journey. It's like realizing that the world is not what was presented to me. It's not what was taught. It's not what the people in the lab coats are out there purporting. Like, it's way different. And that's a magical place to be. I love the fact that, we're on this adventure of discovery. And so you probably stand above almost anybody else I could think of who's willing to have those conversations, who's not afraid of it. And you have a great sense of humor about it. So Dr. Tom Cowan, I really, really appreciate that. Can you tell the people like where they can follow you and learn more? I mean, you've got so many projects. Like, I would just want to personally shout out here, Dr. Tom Cowan's or Dr. Cowan's Garden. You guys, I don't know if you know about this, but that's just like legendary. Well, tell us a little bit about this.
I mean, we have two companies. This is the food side and I guess skincare. So we have, vegetable powders. We have, we partner with people who, real grass-fed meat and, and bones and organ meats. And we have all kinds of interesting and good stuff. The other side of it is the Dr. Tom Cowan, which is more the informational and the medical stuff. So we have turpentine, we have water devices, we have our medicine, Strophanthus, plasma, seawater, all kinds of, essentially it's the pharmacopoeia of real medicine. And so, and there's a lot of, I do webinars and podcasts and spout my mouth off the kind of stuff.
Cool. Right on, you guys. Well, there's links in for Dr. Cowan in the description below. So please go make sure you follow, support him. And Dr. Cowan, there's so many things I want to get into you with. So maybe, here sometime down the line, we can reconnect and go over some more of this stuff. So
great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sticking around a little extra longer to speak to me today. I really appreciate it. And
okay.
I guess I'll let you go. I'll probably still stream here for a little bit, but I'll let you go here. So thank you so much.
Right. Thanks, Scott.
Take care, Tom. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen, the great Tom Cowan. Amazing, fascinating stuff. So we set up the interview, and you guys normally know I like to run for about an hour or so. And he's like, "Oh, I thought it was half an hour." And then the and he's like, "Oh yeah," we were like, "That's fine, that's cool. Let's just cut it at half an hour, no big deal." And before the show, like, I was talking to him and telling him about some of my interests in the topic and some of the research I've done. And I think he kind of like recognized the fact that maybe this guy isn't just your average Joe Blow off the street. Maybe we're actually gonna have a good conversation here. So he's like, "All right, well, let me go tell my wife, because I gotta milk the cows. So let me go tell the wife real quick that I'm gonna keep going, and let's just like not have an end to it. And if we're still streaming, then she has to go milk the cows." So I'm over here like, damn, do I just keep going for the hour and have his poor wife not poor wife, I'm sure she loves milking cows, but at the same time, I'm like, damn it, I feel bad. Like I'm going to be over here using all of Tom's time and His wife's going to have to milk the cows, but that's all right. That's a good balance. We ran for about 40 minutes with the great Tom Cowan. So, I mean, if you guys are in the chat, let me know what you think. If you guys have questions or anything, for me, we touched on it a couple times in there. Like, really, to me, this is the topic.
Last but not least is this clip from James Corbett about the Better Way conference.
Any one person is 100% correct on any one thing at the moment. So it really requires, discernment, using your intuition and navigating the way through these different discussions and reaching your own conclusions.
This is the thing that really excites me about this conference, is that there is not the uniformity of expression that is going to be demanded or expected of everyone. No, in fact, the disagreement is actually part of the solution, because yes, certainly we are disunited, we are pulled apart in so many different ways, but if we cannot come together to even talk about our differences, if we can't even model that, then how on earth are we going to progress forward? And these are some incredibly, let's not be naive about it. These are some incredibly difficult problems that we are facing. And there is no, as you say, there's no money for organizations like the World Council for Health from Big Pharma or organizations like that. This isn't, the people's agenda is not going to be as well funded and subsidized and helped along as the opposite side of that. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be hashed out in a serious and thoroughgoing manner. So I'm excited to be taking part, not only as a speaker, but also as a moderator on some of these conversations. And from my perspective, I like the idea of framing each conversation explicitly around that idea of going towards the solution, from climate change to nature nurture, from thought control to free thought, because that, I think, puts the emphasis in the right place, that we should be keeping our mind on where we're going rather than where we've been. I don't know if I have a question in any of that, but I think those are important things to bring out.
It's interesting because we did think and frame it quite carefully, because originally we had, for example, we had, a free thought, what am I saying? A thought control versus free thought. So we had versus, and then we thought, well, we don't just want to put these things against each other and say, well, it's this or that. We wanted to show, actually, this is where we are, and it's a transition from there to the better world that we're trying to create, or we are creating. And the other thing that you mentioned was, how whilst there are all these central themes, and they need to be discussed, because in any one thing, you can see even the way the WHO is framing things, or these globalists are framing things. They'll say we need to work together for the greater good or whatever. Well, in many ways, the better way is also working together for a higher good, but not selling your soul and being stuck in a cage for it. So there's sort of parallels in the narrative, but there's sort of a split. There's the dystopian split, the dystopian way, and there's the better way. And it's a better way. It's not the better way, because there's not going to be one way out of this. But if we all just work, in that with the mindset and the heart space and intention to create something better than what we've got, that's better for the environment and our children.
Exactly. Well, to my mind, that speaks to the centralization of power and control, which authority figures always want to expand as much as possible, to consolidate as much control as possible. Whereas I think the real resilience comes from decentralized networks of people, from the grassroots up. That is where I think real sustainable in the real sense, not in the co-opted United Nations agenda sense, but the real sustainability of systems that can actually support human life and flourishing, which presumably should be the goal. Anyway, at any rate, I think that is the right way to frame this emphasis. I guess we could talk a lot about what is going to be talked about, but that seems like it might be people get the idea by now, and if not, of course, they can go to betterwayconference.org. Let's talk about some of the technical details of how this conference will unfold, how people can attend, because unfortunately, for the purposes of this conversation, most of my audience probably is not in England or will not be able to make it there for this conference. Is there a way for them to participate virtually?
Yes, there is. Now, in actual fact, there were a lot of people that came from all over the world last time. So don't be put off. It's very central. It's easy to get to Bath, and Bath's a very easy city. It's, small and very picturesque. So it's easy to be here. There are advantages to coming in person because there are workshops that won't be live streamed. So the whole conference is live streamed. And you can get a ticket for not very much for the whole weekend and take part in all the conversations. And if you own a pub or whatever, you can buy a ticket for your entire pub and have all your neighborhood around. We would be delighted if you did do that. But the advantages of coming in person is that we have some workshops during the day, both in all 3 days, and they range from self-help for vaccine injury, and we have one of those on each days with Pierre Corey, Dr. Pierre Corey, and Dr. Sarah Myhill on the one day, and Dr. Paul Marek and Dr. Tina Piers on the other, or the other way around anyway. So real expert advice and small groups. But also we have like a singing workshop, singing therapy. We have some Qigong. We have digital sovereignty, how to get yourself digitally sovereign, how to, develop a sovereign mind, and those sorts of things. So there's always these really wonderful things you can participate in if you're actually there. But having said that, we are hoping that many thousands will attend online and really get the spirit of things. From a creative point of view, if I could just say, it's not dry and boring. It's a totally different, I would say, concept for a conference, and maybe next year we should call it a festival rather. But we have a lot of creative contributions, and including an epic song that we're going to release, I think, maybe in the next 2 weeks or so, which will, I think, inspire even the stoniest of hearts at this stage.
Well, I'm very interested to hear about that and to hear that, so I will be looking forward to that. All right, I think we will be directing people to betterwayconference.org so they can fill in the blanks on the details of last year's conference and get prepared for this year's conference. But is there anything else that you'd like to let people know before we go?
There is actually, and it's our World Council for Health policy brief on rejecting monopoly power over global public health. This is something you can find on our website. If you go to worldcouncilforhealth.org, about us, there's policy there. So this is it's our very first policy brief. We have 2 more on the way, but this one is highly important, and I urge you to your viewers to download it. It's 45-page analysis of the monopoly power of the pandemic treaty, as well as the amendments to the IHR, and it's put together by political scientists and legal experts. It's really well presented, shall I say, because these documents are very tricky. There's a strain of, for example, there are a number of articles that relate to sovereignty. So if you say, well, we must reject that one over there, number one, well, there are others that sort of hook you back in. So it's sort of these changes are far-reaching, and they're ubiquitous throughout these documents. So it really needed a good look, sort of, and a sort of integration of the meaning of them. And so I recommend that people look at that document if they want to really understand what's going on, and also print out the amendment document from the WHO website from November, so that you can see it's, and your viewers probably know this, but a really good way of just describing to people what it's like having a rental agreement with a landlord, for example, and then he comes with a new agreement, and the whole thing is stricken out and there's a whole lot of new text and pages. It's literally like that, and countries don't actually, governments don't have to sign this. The public's not being invited to participate, and they have far-reaching effects. So please do, if you want to just get a really sensible, easy to digest overview of the implications of this document, so that you can speak with these documents, you can speak with others about it, please do have a look and download our policy brief.
Excellent. I will be linking that in the show notes so people can go and get it. And obviously, I think, again, my audience will probably be primed for that with my regular monthly conversations with Meryl Nass, looking at that particular issue and trying to dissect it. So that policy brief sounds like it will come in very handy for that. But on that note, I think we will leave it there. Dr. Tessalori, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, James. I look forward to meeting you in person soon.
Likewise.
Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of The Independent Review. See you all next week.
Have such a good digital twin that you'll be able to go into the metaverse, into a virtual reality world, turn a dial, pull a switch, feel around, and actually change it in the real plant?
Absolutely. And this is not far off. I mean, the physical and the digital worlds, they will grow together, and the result is exactly what you just said.
I wanted to ask when you all think we're going to move from this form factor to something that's on your face, glasses, and when computing's all on the edge.
All right, 50 seconds. Who wants to answer quickly?
I think it will go. It will. First of all, it will definitely happen. I was talking about 6G earlier, which is around 2030. I would say that by then, definitely the smartphone as we know it today will not anymore be the usual kind of the most common interface.
Wow.
Many of these things will be built directly into our bodies. Many of these things will be built directly into our bodies.
Many of these things will be built directly into our bodies.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants.
Hello, Bethany speaking. Hello. You phoning for Bethany?
Yes. What are you doing?
This is Bethany. Can you hear me?
Well, you're right in front of me.
But can you hear me down the phone?
Oh my God.
This is me. On the phone, I had it implanted. My hand is the phone. I can walk and talk because I'm on the phone inside my hand. I am the phone. This is what phones are going to be from now on. I have integrated. Thank you for your call. Subdermal implants. They charge themselves with motion like a self-winding watch. And it's on the 22 network. I get signal across 95% of UK mainland, 98 by next year.
When I phoned you, it was ringing. You were ringing.
That's the speaker. So small.
Could the human body be used to power technologies of the future? Scientists think that is possible. Researchers at the University of Massachusetts Amherst have found that the human body could be used to collect waste energy that could then be used to power the technology of the future. The researchers said that the human body could be used for 6G, which is the next generation of wireless communication. Hello, and welcome to Businessville. In today's video, we will look at how 6G technology will use the human body as a source of energy. But before we continue with the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get more amazing content. Now, let's get this video started. While 5G is still being set up in cities and rural areas around the world, engineers are already working on 6G networks. VLC, which uses light sources to send data, is one of the promising technologies that could push 6G well past 5G. The future of 6G promises data rates up to 1,000 times faster and a tenth of the latency of 5G. That's fast, don't you think? With 6G on the horizon, an even larger number of devices and sensors are expected to go online, bringing a new phase of the Internet of Things era that is anticipated to start with the current 5G. The reason why 6G will have faster communication speeds is the development of VLC, a kind of wireless fiber optic network. So what exactly is visible light communication, or VLC? Visible light communication is, at its most basic, a wireless method that uses the light emitted by LEDs to deliver networked, mobile, high-speed communication similar to Wi-Fi, leading to the term Li-Fi. Now that's something to be excited about. It can be used as a standalone solution or as a supplement to radio frequency or cellular network communication. The idea behind the technology is to turn LEDs on and off very quickly, within nanoseconds, at a very high frequency. As the visible light spectrum is 10,000 times larger than the radio frequency spectrum, VLC is seen as a way to make up for the limited bandwidth of radio frequency. The industry has produced very high data transmission rates, which makes it competitive. Even though the signal can't go through walls or other obstacles, a direct line of sight isn't needed as long as the light is reflected from other surfaces. The LED lights must be on for the signal to be sent, but they can be turned down to a very low level. If VLC becomes a reality, it will be better than Wi-Fi at sending data, because it won't cause electromagnetic interference. How does visible light communication work? VLC works a lot like radio transmissions when it comes to sending information, except that it does this with light from LEDs instead of radio waves. Professor of Information and Computer Sciences at the University of Massachusetts Amos G. Chong says that in a VLC array, one LED can turn on and off 1 million times per second. Since LED lights are used in all of our buildings, businesses, streets, and cars, we already have the infrastructure in place to use this technology. Also, any device with a camera, like a laptop, tablet, or smartphone, can act as a receiver and make the technology work. These LEDs also leak energy in the form of side-channel radio frequency or radio waves. This energy could be used to power VLC devices. How are scientists planning to harness RF leakage? Shong and his colleagues set out to create an antenna that could pick up this energy. They made their antenna out of copper wires that were wound into coils. The antennas were then put to the test to see how much energy they could gather. The researchers found that the antenna could pick up more energy when it was connected to another item, regardless of the coil's thickness or the number of times the copper wire was twisted. Researchers put the antenna in contact with things like wood, steel, walls, tablets, phones, and even laptops to see how much energy could be harvested. The team found that the amount of energy collected went up when electronic devices were used, but the most energy was collected when the coil was in contact with a human body. In short, the future of 6G technology is amazing and will change the way we think about energy. The human body will be used as an energy source, which means that we could see a world where people are far more connected than ever before. This technology is still in its early stages, but it is clear that it has the potential to revolutionize the way we live and work.